The opening sequence for Invincible Season 2 throws viewers for a loop. For a moment, it looks like Mark Grayson/Invincible is in a tiff with the Immortal, the superhero of his father murdered twice. But the scene quickly takes a much darker turn. Omni-Man arrives and quickly dispatches the Immortal, and we then learn that Mark and his father have now joined forces and enslaved the Earth in the name of the Viltrumite Empire. Omni-Man and Invincible act as though they are benevolent rulers, running propaganda messages on endless loops over the destroyed dystopia of America. However, one man, Angstrom Levy, is seen sneaking through the city and making contact with what's left of the Guardians of the Globe and their resistance effort, including surviving leaders Adam Eve and Rudy Connors/Robot. Unfortunately, Angstrom leads Invincible and Omni-Man to the resistance base where there's a quick battle before the Guardians fall. Robot and Connors are killed in the battle, while Mark takes the merciful step of snapping Eve's neck just enough to leave her paralyzed, a move he apparently practiced with great focus before perfecting. The rest of the resistance is rounded up for execution, but Levy escapes via a portal, revealing this to be an alternate timeline where Mark joined his dad instead of fighting him. Back in the prime reality of Invincible, we get a montage that helps establish the new status quo a month after the brutal Season 1 finale and its epilogue, set to the tune of Radiohead's Karma Police. Mark is seen visiting the mountainside where his father nearly beat him to death and doing battle with a villain in an elephant costume reminiscent of Spider-Man villain the Rhino, stopping a high-speed chase/robbery, helping an ambulance get to the ER quickly, anything to put off the obvious depression he's going through. However, a standoff with two villains has Mark experiencing flashbacks that prove he's nowhere near over the trauma he experienced. A news report focuses in on Chicago and the cleanup efforts after Omni-Man's rampage, footage his wife Debbie and Mark cannot watch. Even though mother and son express intimacy, it's clear that Nolan/Omni-Man's betrayal has left them somewhat estranged. Meanwhile, the Mauler twins trying to lobby their favorite jail guard Pete for better cuisine when the same green portal Angstrom Levy disappeared into appears in each one of their cells. The Maulers find themselves in the ruins of the prison and standing on Pete's burned corpse. They meet Levy and quickly discern that his superpower is opening portals between dimensions. Levy asserts that he's good and a pacifist and proposes an alliance with the skeptical Maulers to achieve a unique feat of science, or he can leave them stranded in a hellscape. The Maulers hate having to be underlings again but take the bait. Back at school, Mark has to play the part of a grieving son who lost his dad in the Omni-Man attack, which at least works to solve his feud with longtime bully Todd. Amber tries to talk sense into Mark about his emotional health, but Mark is clearly consumed with guilt from all sides for not doing more to stop his dad to getting sympathy when he, Invincible, was part of the reason for the destruction. Mark meets with GDA director Cecil at Burger Mart to discuss leaving the trappings of his civilian alter ego behind and working as Invincible full-time. However, Cecil shoots it down, telling Mark he's not as emotionally healed as he's posturing that he is. Mark loses his cool and illustrates the very thing he wants to deny, being as dangerous as his dad. Cecil goes back to the GDA, which is in the midst of a Guardians of the Globe mission fighting a baby giant. Robot, Rex, Duplicate, Shrinking Ray, Black Samson, and Monster Girl are actually working more like a unit than ever, but Rudy, now wearing Robot as an armor suit, has a moment that suggests his new homegrown human body has a potential flaw. Rudy nearly gets flattened by the giant, but is saved by his bone Monster Girl. The Maulers are working with Angstrom Levy on his invention as he lays out how he's journeyed the multiverse and found answers to all the troubled Earths out there through resources on alternate Earths. Levy reveals that he has an entire army of his own variants spread across his home dimension and alternate safe house dimensions, all feeding him intel from the multiverse. The machine he wants the Mauler twins to build will copy the mental data of Levy's variants and combine them into one grand design in his own brain, making him the benevolent nexus of all realities. In exchange, the Mauler twins will get to occupy an Earth with no superheroes where they are worshipped. Back at the Grayson house, Debbie gets a visit from Olga, the widow of speedster hero Red Rush. Debbie and Olga talk through the complicated emotions they both feel, as well as their mutual rage at Nolan for betraying them and ruining both their marriages. When Mark gets home and gives them an icy reception, Olga advises Debbie to help her son by helping herself, advice Debbie clearly isn't ready to hear. The new Guardians of the Globe are seen in their headquarters getting chewed out by Cecil over their sloppy handling of the baby giant attack. Cecil decides to add 2 new members to the team to balance things out. The immortal and experienced team leader and Bulletproof, a hero whose name clearly implies his invulnerability powers. Rudy accepts his demotion in acknowledgement that his new clone body may need improvement. Mark gets to reconnect with Adam Eve at school, and they talk through his daddy issues. Eve tries to encourage Mark that people can see the difference in him, but he counters that Cecil can't. When Eve challenges Mark to prove his mettle to Cecil, Mark steps up and volunteers to work for the GDA. His recruitment comes just in time as a global emergency is identified. The Mahler twins and Angstrom Levy finish building the machine to help Levy process the combined knowledge of all his variants. Levy is warned of the danger of aborting the process before completion, and then the switch gets thrown. At first, Levy is evolving as planned. The twins complete their trans-dimensional travel machine and speak tons of sci-fi jargon. Mark busts in to stop them. Angstrom summons variant Maulers to stave him off. In order to stop the Maulers from killing Mark and morally compromising his quest, Angstrom blows up the machine. Cecil and the Guardians assume Mark is responsible for the victory. Mark comes home to his mom passed out on the table. He rouses her for dinner. Mark and Amber discover that they got into the same college. Immortal comes to see Mark and tells him he's not convinced Mark is on the right side. In the rubble of the explosion, a Mauler emerges. He finds a mutated Angstrom, whose mind and memories have been fused together. As a result, he's crazed and bent on revenge against Invincible. At the beginning of episode 2 of Invincible's second season, it's graduation day at RVJ High School, but Mark is missing from his seat next to Amber, Eve, and William. Mark fights a rematch against Doc Seismic at the Washington Monument. This time, he has giant magma friends to help him fight and destroy. Mark is able to sneak out a win despite a ton of damage to the famous obelisk. He gets back to the ceremony just in time. The four amigos share summer plans at Eve's treehouse. Mark is rather separate, anxiously poised for duty. The NASA-esque Space Force discusses Season 1's mission to Mars, where sequids are threatening to take over. Astronaut Russ, though, is one of these body-snatching, shape-shifting creatures. Eve helps cut through the red tape of city construction, helping Chicago rebuild from the Invincible's Omni-Man fight. Debbie fails to relieve Mark's anxiety over becoming like his father. Immortal and Duplicate hook up to Rex's dismay. Sequid Russ struggles with human behavior. Mark arrives at the cursed Midnight City in search of a revived Darkwing. It turns out that his assistant, sidekick is degrading, has taken up Darkwing's mantle. He tries to leave Mark in a dark realm called the Shadowverse, but Mark traps the new Darkwing with him. Mark threatens that no one knows what he's capable of and that he could be like his father. Debbie criticizes Cecil over his arrangement with Mark. She's surprised to see Donald, who died at Omni-Man's hand. Eve learns that her father works a minimum wage job at Burger Mart. She turns an apple into a 24-karat gold apple, but her father refuses to take it. Mark tries to give Amber a special lunch by flying to Vegas, but it's called to action by Cecil. In the wake of Omni-Man murdering Horus, Atlantean Custom commands that Mark marry Horus's widow to atone for the crime. Meanwhile, the Guardians get back into the action to fight the Lizard League. Sequid Russ emerges as a shape-shifting superhero. It so happens that Aquaria was the true ruler of Atlantis, and she's done away with the old marriage customs. Instead, Mark faces trial by combat for his father's sins. The Depth Dweller, Mark's opponent, is humongous. Debbie has a tough day selling a house to a couple with an angry, controlling husband. She's sent home after remarking, "She's not your pet." Mark requires backup to escape the Depth Dweller. After he's home free, the beast begins slaughtering the Atlantean people. He decides at this moment that he's not his father and rushes back to help with renewed strength. He's still pulled into the depths and manages an unseen, narrow escape to the surface. Cecil counts him lucky. Donald doesn't realize he's a clone. Eve's dad shares the other side's perspective of her work in Chicago. Because of her actions, the condemned areas she rebuilt collapse into unstable ground the city had cordoned off. Debbie, confronted with the metaphor of the broken cabinet door, rips it from the wall. Not even Mark can console her. Shake Smith reveals his fake origin story over images of sequids escaping Mars. The Supreme Lizard is killed by a loyalist to King Lizard. In the epilogue, Angstrom leaves a captured evil Mark to be dealt with by female versions of Cecil and Donald. Invincible goes to college in episode 3 of the series. Mark, embarrassed by his toys, throws them all into the dumpster, save for his favorite, Science Dog. William, now Mark's roommate, explains the familiar sock over the door implications and immediately puts it to use. Mark and Amber have sex for the first time as well. A narrator then turns our attention to this missive, this machination. The narrator recounts planet Unopa being taken over by the Viltrumites. They join the coalition of planets. The Unopans created Alan, Seth Rogen, to challenge the Viltrumites and ultimately search for anyone that could defeat them. Rather than introduce the show as Invincible, the title credits read Alan the Alien. Alan informs the Coalition about Invincible. The Coalition is not doing well against the Viltrumites. Alan argues with the Council on Mark's behalf because they don't trust Viltrumites. Thetis suspects the Viltrumites have infiltrated the Council. Everyone is busy getting busy, so the narrator turns our attention to Alan's cat-like alien pet. At dinner, Alan is confronted by 3 Viltrumites. They're looking to confirm that Omni-Man had a child on Earth and abandoned his post. Alan won't answer their questions, so they beat him to within an inch of his life while his girlfriend watches. Thetis pulls the plug on Alan, killing him. Robot, now Rudy, is hard at work removing fear from his brain, literally. This doesn't sit well with Monster Girl. He summons the courage to ask her to a movie, and she agrees. Debbie goes to a support group for spouses of superheroes. She meets Theo. Monster Girl helps Rudy sneak into his first ever in-theater movie and try his first burger. Debbie and Theo bond over their experiences over drinks, but Debbie learns that Omni-Man killed Theo's partner, the Green Ghost. As it turns out, William was not having sex earlier. He just forgot to take the sock off the door after his demonstration. Cian's dog, the real one, knocks on the door, asking for Mark. He's actually Newell's asking Invincible to help his people from death by meteor showers. Invincible agrees to help despite Cecil's protests. Debbie decides to open up to Theo outside the bar. Theo is angry hearing the truth and tells Debbie not to come back to the group. The shape-shifting bug, Newell's leads Mark to his king. The king is Nolan/Omni-Man, Mark's father. The episode ends on a cliffhanger. The episode opens with a flashback to the climactic ending to Season 1. Only this time we get to follow Omni-Man after he flies away from Earth. Nolan flew into the depths of space alone with no apparent direction until he eventually ends up at a black hole and tries to kill himself by being sucked into it. At that moment, a Thraxan ship appears and nearly gets pulled into the void, but Omni-Man saves the vessel and returns them Thraxa, where the Thraxans beg him to stay and be their protector. Note, the song that plays during the montage is Avalanche by Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds. New family who dis. Back in the present day, Mark confronts Emperor Nolan, and after some initial tension, father and son embrace in a hug. The moment doesn't last very long as Mark is still deeply angry with his father, including over the latest lie that brought him to Thraxa. After a brief tantrum, Mark tries to fly away, but he's too far from Earth to make it. Nolan implores Mark to hear him out about the Thraxan plight. However, that explanation takes a sick twist when Mark is confronted with the fact that Nolan has a new Thraxan wife, Andressa, as well as a rapidly growing Thraxan son, who is Mark's half-brother. Mark's WTF reaction leads us into the title sequence, then immediately back to Mark so he can finish the expletive-laden rant. Back on Earth, Debbie Grayson, Sandra Oh, is still wandering aimlessly after taking the massive hit of being kicked out of her support group. Debbie visits Nolan's Fox grave, still struggling over what is real or not between them, with Mark being the only real benefit. It's clear that Debbie is at her lowest ebb. The Mauler twins are back. After losing one clone, the original, Mauler and Angstrom Levy's explosive experiment back in Episode 1, the surviving Mauler creates a new clone of himself. Since the original is now easily discernible thanks to his Two-Face-style disfigurement, the clone Mauler immediately knows he's the clone. Donald goes to pay Debbie a visit, but she's out doing graveyard therapy. Donald's instincts lead him across the street to the ruins of the safe house he used to manage while monitoring Omni-Man. When Donald finds his own glasses in the rubble, it confirms his suspicions that something is terribly wrong with his reality. Adam Eve visits Amber and William at college looking to reconnect with Mark after her emotional fallout with her dad. Since Mark is away in space, Eve agrees to hang out at her place in the city for the night before meeting William and Amber for brunch the next day. Back on Thraxa, Nolan tries to pacify Mark with an explanation that his new son ages rapidly and that they both have a mutual enemy in the Viltrumites, who will be coming to punish Nolan for leaving Earth. Nolan makes Mark aware that the Viltrumites will come after him and his half-brother too, with the latter almost guaranteed to be executed as a lower breed of life form. Protecting family and innocence alike are all Nolan thinks Mark needs as motivation. And he's right. Mark ponders joining with his father, but it's a moot point. The 3 Viltrumite soldiers that tracked down and killed Alan the alien arrive on Thraxa. Adam Eve is sleeping at a Guardians of the Globe safe house in the city when recurring C-list villain Kill Cannon shows up to steal one of Robot's old power sources. Luckily, a fight is exactly what he was looking for. Mark gets Andressa and his half-brother to safety in some caves beneath Thraxa. He learns that the average Thraxan lifespan is only 1 Earth year, though his half-brother is aging at a slower pace than that. He also hears the softer side of Andressa fell in love with Nolan after he saved her ship. They make enough of a connection that when the largest Viltrumite soldier, Lucan, shows up, Mark battles to protect his dad's new family. Lucan proves to be even more ruthless than Nolan, and Mark is quickly overwhelmed until his dad saves him. Nolan and Lucan have a savage tussle that ends with Nolan disemboweling him with a karate chop and running him through with a stalagmite for good measure. Omni-Man and Invincible regroup and prepare to fight the other two soldiers. Eve battles Kill Cannon on a bridge, but things go awry when the arrogant young heroine lets a car with two elderly bystanders fall off the bridge. Eve dives in and saves them, but they still end up severely injured. Eve can't handle another case of her hero work going wrong and is left in emotional crisis. At home, Debbie is going through the catharsis of pulling photos out of her family albums when she's visited by hero costume designer Art Rosenbaum, Mark Hamill. A photo of Mark riding a bike makes Debbie recall how Nolan flew off to save someone during the riding lesson, while she actually succeeded in teaching Mark to ride. Art finally gets through to Debbie after pointing out that she was always a strong person, even without powers, who helped cover Nolan's shortcomings and probably helped save Earth via her love of him. She was never dependent on Nolan or weaker than him, quite the opposite. It's exactly what Debbie needs to hear to finally find her resolve and truly move on. Donald can't let go of his curiosity and hacks a computer archive terminal in the GDA building to see the security footage from the safe house on the day he died. Needless to say, he's left shaken. On Thraxa, Nolan is feeling more emotion about the death and destruction the Viltrumites are causing, and he's both furious at and bewildered by it. He lashes out at Mark, demanding to know why empathy is desirable when it feels so bad. The philosophy debate is interrupted when the final two Viltrumite soldiers show up for round 2 of battle. The fight is brutal. At one point, Nolan takes Mark aside and chastises him for not fighting like a true Viltrumite, demanding he unleashes full fury and killer instinct. Mark fights the female soldier with her razor-haired braid and finally starts to lay some true smackdown on her. In the end, though, he's still too soft. Nolan slaughters his opponent, but Mark hesitates with the kill blow and ends up getting stabbed. Nolan brutally finishes the female soldier and saves Mark, but Lucan shows up carrying his own guts and takes Nolan out with an earth-shattering drop kick. With every Viltrumite down, Luca informs the Empire that the mission is a success. Mark awakes injured and immobile on Thraxa just in time to see his dad being carted away by the Viltrumites. Nolan begs Mark to remember the good he did for Earth and to read the books he wrote. It's clear the books hold some important knowledge for Mark to find. An ending montage plays, set to the tune of I Am Yesterday, eases some cliffhanger endings for Donald, Eve, and Debbie. Debbie gets her groove back by formally breaking all financial ties with Cecil, the GDA, and Nolan's estate. She puts Nolan's belongings out on the curb for pickup, including his collection of novels. Eve is seen riding a bus and ignoring the scheduled brunch and message queries from Amber and William. We see her enter her parents' house again in seeming surrender to the fact that she's not the capable adult she thought she was. Donald goes into the bathroom of the GDA and takes the drastic step of cutting into his own arm with a knife like a scene out of Terminator. At first, the pain and blood confirm his humanity. However, when he looks at the knife, the tip is impossibly bent. Donald realizes he's not quite human, but Cecil's sudden beck and call over comms just quickly gets him back on the job. Mark is visited by Viltrumite General Clancy Brown. Craig says the victory in battle has earned Mark a chance to be part of the Viltrumite Empire. When Mark starts to refuse, Craig brutally and concisely explains that Nolan is going to be executed for desertion, and Mark is now the new Viltrumite agent in charge of preparing Earth for peaceful conquest. If he does not, the Viltrumites will come to Earth and wipe out billions of humans. Mark is wished good luck and left bleeding into the Thraxan soil. The end credits scene sees the two-faced Mauler betrayed and poisoned by the clone. Apparently, physical proof that there's an original is a deal-breaker, and the clone stands over his dead twin, exclaiming that sometimes things are the way they are for a good ***** reason. Hopefully that means a return to the classic Mauler twins formula. To close out the end credits, we finally get a track from fan-fave music group Run the Jewels, titled The Ground Below. Episode 5 picks up with the brewing sequid invasion that Season 1 introduced. Millions of alien parasites are on their way to Earth to take control of the planet, and Mark is unwittingly roped in to help stop them. Back on Earth, things aren't going much better, with the Lizard League picking up their game in their latest scheme of world domination. On Thraxa, shortly after the brutal fight against the Viltrumites, Mark is bloody and bruised. He's helped back to the city, and Anissa tells him not to take the blame for what happened. After a short time jump, Mark is helping to rebuild. Nolza tells Mark a ship is ready to take him home, but Mark says everything will be fine in his absence. Anissa urges Mark to go home and take his brother with him. Back on Earth, Debbie finishes work and is gifted with wine. Before she can drink any, Mark gets home and stuns her with his brother and what happened. She's unsure what to do, but forbids Mark from dropping out of college, and Mark doesn't want to get Cecil to take care of his brother. Debbie says she'll take some time off work to figure out what to do. At the Global Defense Agency, GDA, Donald interrupts a briefing to try to talk to Cecil. He's ignored at first, but when he orders everyone out of the room, Cecil pays attention. Donald wants to know what's happened to him, as he doesn't remember Omni-Man's attack and he's got wires in his arm. Cecil takes him to a white room and shows Donald he's now an android and only his brain was left intact. Donald begins to panic, especially as Cecil says that he's better off without his memories, though Donald retorts it's only better for Cecil. At college, Mark interrupts William's study. Mark tells him what happened on Thraxa, and William says that because he was gone for 2 months, Mark needs to see the dean of the college. Mark goes to see Amber first, but is interrupted by Cecil, who's frustrated Mark disobeyed orders and didn't check in. Mark says everything seemed fine without him, especially as Cecil knows about his brother. Cecil threatens to take him from Mark, but once Mark agrees to check in with Cecil, he calls his team off. Mark sees Amber, and the pair catch up. Amber has had a rough 2 months. Her gran had died, and she failed a test. Donald stares at the android, which chokes him. It's just in his imagination, though, as a woman tells him their long-range scanners are picking up something. At the Guardians of the Globe HQ, Monster Girl is training against Duplicate. Rudy tries to warn Immortal about Amanda's backward aging, but she overhears and yells at him for being controlling. Rex mocks Rudy about his girl trouble, but is hilariously interrupted by Cecil, who randomly teleports in. He warns them about the sequids and reveals that Shapesmith is in Martian, getting him to explain why he's here. Shapesmith says he's always wanted to visit Earth, so when Invincible and the astronauts came, Shapesmith knocked one out and took his place. The sequids find him, form a hive mind, and take over Mars. Cecil stops the other Guardians from punishing Shapesmith, and Immortal tells him that Bulletproof, Black Samson, Monster Girl, and Shapesmith will go to stop the sequids. Rudy volunteers to join them. Adam Eve is done with being a superhero after hurting people in Chicago and recklessly stopping Kilcannon. She lives at home. Rex visits her to remind her of the good she does and reassures her that the family she saved from Kilcannon will make a full recovery. He then asks her help with the sequids. Debbie is struggling to find a food Mark's brother likes. Mark asks what she did with Nolan's books, to which she replies she threw them out. Mark is taken aback by this, as he wants to use them to find a clue to defeat the Viltrumites. Before this can go further, Cecil wants Mark to help stop the sequids. Cecil offers to look after Mark's brother, but Debbie refuses. On the ship, Eve and Mark hug and catch up. Shapesmith explains that the Martian warship could hold millions of sequids, and the Martians piloting the ship might be able to help them. Rudy says he has a plan to sneak aboard, but Shapesmith says the warship will shoot them down. Lo and behold, missiles are fired at the ship, which has no defensive capabilities. Eve protects them all in a bubble, and they float aboard the ship. Bulletproof attracts the massive sequids, and fighting breaks out. Rudy manages to stun several and says if the team can hold the sequids off for 5 minutes, he can amplify the blast. Eve generates another protective bubble, but the sheer amount of sequids overwhelms her and knocks her out. This leaves Rudy defenseless, and it's this cliffhanger audiences are left on. As the other Guardians stop the sequids, Rex, Shrinking Ray, and Duplicate relax at HQ and order food. Before they can eat it, Cecil alerts them to an attack on a US base by the Lizard League. They go to stop them but are surprised to find the Lizard League have upped their game and are harder to fight. Kate and Shrinking Ray are shockingly killed in the fight. Rex tries to crawl away but gets his hand bitten off. King Lizard puts a gun to his head and Rex says to shoot him. Lizard doesn't do so in this episode, making it unclear if Rex will be alive for much longer in the next one. In a mid-credits scene, Alan the alien is revealed to be still alive and now has jacked muscles. Thetis apologizes for turning off his life support, saying that either Alan would become strong enough to take on the Viltrumites or would die. Thetis also reveals he's a Viltrumite who rebelled against the Empire, and Alan needs to seek out the other Viltrumite who did the same thing, Mark, and bring him to Thetis. Thetis thinks Mark is the key to winning the war. The show begins right where the cliffhanger left things from episode 5, with Rex explode at the mercy of King Lizard after his teammates Duplicate and Shrinking Ray were both brutally killed in the fight with the Lizard League. Well, as stated, this is Invincible, so the cliffhanger didn't set us up for any kind of dramatic twist. Rex gets part of his brains blown clean out. The rest of the Guardians of the Glow are with Invincible and Adam Eve battling the parasitic sequids from Mars and space. Rudy, Robot, is working on a device to take down the horde of parasites, but Adam Eve is still out cold from having her defensive bubble overwhelmed. Martian hero Shapesmith, the cause of this whole disaster. The Immortal grabs the payload to deliver the attack, but Invincible forcibly stops him, claiming to be faster and stronger. Immortal relinquishes the device, begging Invincible not to fail. As the parasites breach Shapesmith's bubble, Eve gets back on her feet and mounts a new defense bubble. Invincible is nearly stopped by the human astronaut Russ Livingston, who is the hive mind host of the sequids. But with help from Immortal, he breaks loose and sets off the pulse bomb. The sequids are rendered inert and Russ Livingston is freed. However, some of the parasites get on Eve and Rudy, allowing the hive mind to attack again with superheroes as his puppets. Immortal and Invincible quickly snatch Eve and Rudy and use another pulse bomb to free them. The Guardians flee the ship with Russ Livingston and Tau before the sequids can recover and restore the hive mind. King Lizard is busy negotiating demands for the nukes he's hijacked when Rex gets up off the floor, not quite dead. Rex can really see, hear, or think straight, but that doesn't stop him from being supremely pissed off. Rex uses the bone from the hand that Komodo Dragon bit off to brutally beat King Lizard to death. When the cavalry finally comes rushing in, Rex is in such shock that he's laughing off their horrified questions about his state. When the dire extent of his injuries finally sink in, Rex passes out, spurting blood from everywhere. As the cleanup crew gets to work, Shrinking Ray manages to wriggle her way out of Komodo Dragon's headless corpse. The Guardians in space are fleeing the Martian warship overrun by the sequids. They are confronted by the native Martians, who thank the heroes for their service, but demand they leave Shapesmith behind to answer for his crime. Instead, the Guardians all make a run for it, with Invincible flying into space and taking out the pursuing Martian ships. As Mark returns to the ship, he and Eve have a charged embrace, with Eve praising his skills. Immortal gives Mark some overdue respect. However, when Monster Girl tries to give Rudy some adoration for his bravery in the fight, Rudy acts more like Robot, concluding his new battle prowess is proof he could also fix her de-aging dilemma. Amanda doesn't want to hear that line again. Debbie is taking care of Nolan's new half-Thraxan son when Cecil drops by to update her on Mark and the Guardians surviving the Martian sequence mission. Debbie calls out Cecil's ulterior motive, wanting to once again lean on her to accept a GDA-sponsored caregiver/spy. Cecil thinks dangling Nolan's betrayals over Debbie will make her reconsider, but it's just the opposite. Debbie cites the fact that it was her care that made Mark the hero he is, and even if she doesn't love Nolan having another son, she can appreciate Mark having a brother. She's willing to go it alone, as she did before. Poor astronaut Russ Livingston makes it to the Pentagon with his mind deeply traumatized by the sequid possession he endured. They never let him sleep. As Invincible, Eve, and the rest of the space mission team get to the medical wing with Livingston, Mark goes home after spending time with Amber and finds his mother has given his half-brother the name Oliver, which he likes. The scene cuts to Immortal giving a eulogy at Duplicate's funeral, where he remembers her real power and believing that the world is good and fighting for it, dying for it countless times, much like Immortal himself. After the service, Samson talks to Immortal, who is broken and baffled by that fact, since he's lived long enough to have lost countless other lovers. With Kate, he confesses to naively thinking they would have more time together. Mark tries to have a coffee date with Amber, and it gets awkward quickly. Amber's college woes and Mark's superhero conflicts and alien baby personal problems don't mix at all. Mark and Amber acknowledge the awkwardness, confessing how much she hates missing out on the college experience because she's constantly waiting on Mark. Mark fantasizes about never having powers, but Amber chastises him, saying he does have powers, and if he didn't live up to the responsibility of using them to help the world, she wouldn't be able to love him. They can't get past that impasse, and Mark is perturbed by it afterward. Back at his dorm room, Mark finds that his best friend William's boyfriend Rick has had his nightmarish cyborg body fully restored to human status by the GDA medics and scientists. Rick is a bit muddled on how well he's doing, but William is overly enthusiastic and Donald is there to help him. When Mark marvels over how Rick looks like nothing happened to him, Donald begins to shake, countering that such reconstructive work always leaves scars of trauma. Mark goes to see Rex, who's away and back to talking trash, telling Mark he's the one who looks to like crap. Rex's near-death experience opened his eyes to what a trash guy he's been to the women in his life, prompting Mark to spill his woes about the personal cost of hero life. When Mark leaves, he runs into Eve coming to see Rex. Mark is somewhat awkward around Eve and quickly departs. Eve sits with Rex and picks up on offhand mention that Mark and Amber are having problems. Debbie interviews a potential nanny, but quickly discerns the Mrs. Doubtfire clone is a GDA agent in disguise. The next candidate comes right on the heels of the first, a woman named April Howsam, who openly admits to being one of Cecil's picks despite being instructed to secrecy, based on the logic that trying to care for a mother's child while deceiving her is insane. Debbie likes that honesty and gives April an interview and learns that she is completely up to date on Debbie's marriage to Nolan/Ami Man and Oliver's half-Viltrumite, half-Thraxan heritage. She easily sways Oliver away from some trouble with scissors while talking, but Debbie is still skeptical until April makes it clear that she works for Debbie and not Cecil. Cecil goes right to work rebuilding the Guardians, heading to Eve's treehouse to ask her to rejoin the Guardians full-time. Eve is still considering her options and offers to help when needed. Cecil offers to keep her spot warm until she inevitably changes her mind. Cecil leaves just as Amber comes calling on Eve for relationship advice. Meanwhile, Mark goes to see a superhero costume maker Art Rosenbaum as a surrogate dad to give him girl advice. Edits between the scene make Mark and Amber's respective outpouring of thought and feeling look like a conversation with one another, one clearly illustrating they are on the same page of feeling like they're failing their relationship. Art and Eve both tell them to talk to one another, not third-party listeners. Mark starts to leave and Art apologizes for what happened with Nolan on Thraxa. That conversation leads both Art and Mark to the revelation that Nolan gave Art a stash of his old sci-fi books, the same books Nolan begged Mark to read just before being arrested on Thraxa. Rick and William go for a nighttime stroll on campus, but the walk triggers Rick's traumatic feelings of what mad scientist Sinclair did to him, and the pain of not being able to remember it. Back in his dorm room, Mark reads a section of one of Nolan's sci-fi novels about an infinity ray that the fictional character Space Rider uses to escape a school of carnivorous spacefish. The blast from the infinity ray was powerful enough to destroy an entire section of space, with Nolan's narration noting that it could be a threat to Viltrumites. A second book details the mission Nolan went on to a planet that had a more intense gravity. The native dinosaur-like species, the Rogners, had developed such strength and durability in that environment that they could easily kill Viltrumites, like Nolan's partner on the mission, who is torn apart like a paper doll. Nolan has a brutal fight with the creatures. We never see how the story ends as it cuts back to Mark, who realizes that his dad's books are real accounts of his travels through the universe. Cecil is trying to confront Immortal about his grief and instability, which Immortal proves by losing on Cecil in a rage for questioning his resolve. A call comes into the GDA about an alien bogey headed for Earth, and Immortal flies off to confront it, assuming it's Omni-Man returning. Instead, it's Alan the alien, Seth Rogen, trying to find his way back to Earth to find Invincible for the coalition of planets leader Thetis. Immortal attacks and keeps getting enraged when Alan psychically tries to talk him down. Alan almost unleashes his new power, but Invincible shows up and stops them. Alan can only psychically communicate with one party at a time, so he must act as a go-between for Invincible and Immortal to convince the latter to stand down. Immortal leaves embarrassed at his outburst, and Invincible and Alan head back to his dorm to talk. Amber is seen standing alone against the wall at a wild college party, almost texting Mark but then reconsidering it. Alan updates Mark on Thetis being a Viltrumite rebel, while Mark updates Alan on what happened on Thraxa. Mark is looking for guidance on what will happen to Nolan, but Alan drops the tease that Viltrumites rarely just kill their own, without formal rituals of trial. When Alan asks Mark to join the coalition and venture back into space, Mark turns him down out of fear of leaving Earth and disrupting his life again so soon. Mark gives Alan a consolation prize of scanning all of Nolan's novels, after confirming Mark's hunch that they are based on real intel Nolan gathered. If Thetis can also confirm it, the coalition would have leads on weapons and slash or tactics that could defeat the Viltrumites, making Alan's mission a success. Alan leaves Mark with a lead. There's a Viltrumite prison where Nolan could be being held. Nolan is seen to indeed be imprisoned at the Viltrumite penal colony, with General Craig demanding to know why one of the Empire's most dedicated and heroic soldiers had been softened by Earth. Nolan refuses to answer or fight back, and Craig tosses him back in a cell, where Nolan pounds the floor, proving he still has the power he needs to fight if he desires to. Russ Livingston is trying to clean up the mess that Shapesmith made of his apartment, gagging at the rotting food left in it. That gag becomes a violent puke into the sink, only to reveal a surviving sequid that leaps onto Russ's face, once again giving the hive mind a leader, now embedded on Earth. The mid-credits scene sees Angstrom Levy buying a suit from a multi-armed tailor, saying he needs it for the occasion of seeing an old friend. Levy portals out of the shop and strolls through several ominous-looking dimensions: a zombie Earth, a prehistoric Earth, a snow-covered Earth, and finally back to Invincible's home dimension, where it declares that it's good to be home. Invincible Season 2 Episode 7 starts with Grayson and his girlfriend, Amber, attend Comic-Con, where Mark has the embarrassing realization that Invincible cosplay has become a thing. Mark and Amber have awkward vibes as Mark worries about if she's enjoying the con, while Amber asserts that she knows what she likes and doesn't fake it, and probably spends more time than Mark reading comics since he's off doing superhero stuff so much. There's a big in-joke scene where Mark gets his Science Dog comic signed by the creator Philip Schaff, who informs him why Season 2 of the animated series is taking so long and how they have to cut certain corners of animation to get it done. Big in-joke from the comics repurposed for animation. Mark gets a call from Adam Eve that Rexplode has fled the hospital, where he's supposed to be recovering from a bullet in the head. Since Eve is once again busting her nemesis Kilkanan, Mark has to ditch Amber yet again to track down Rex. At this point, Amber doesn't even flinch from being abandoned. Rex is facing a massive aquatic cybernetic villain called Octobos. Rex is trying to talk himself back up after his near-death experience and leaps into the fight. Octobos' loose grip on English makes Rex mock him badly, but eventually the villain gains the upper hand, nearly crushing Rex under his metal boot. Invincible shows up and saves Rex, but Rex wants to go it alone, saying he needs the experience. When Octobos comes charging in again, Rex remembers to deploy his power through the new cannon built into his cybernetic left hand and quickly fries Octobos. Rex and Invincible have a post-battle chat about what it's like coming back from a serious superhero beatdown, physically and mentally, whether it's Rex losing Duplicate or Mark facing his own father, Omni-Man. Rex asks about Mark and Amber, and when he hears Mark ditch her at Comic-Con, he makes a deal. Mark gets to pick a day where the Guardians of the Globe will cover for him so he can have a personal life. Mark is hesitant, but Rex insists the Guardians are still the best superhero team on the planet and can cover his absence. Robot is letting Amanda/Monster Girl test drive a new robot drone built in the image of her Monster Girl form. Amanda doesn't like the interface, but Rudy promises he can perfect it and fix her. Amanda accepts she can't be fixed because she's cursed, putting more strain on their relationship. Black Samson and Bulletproof have a conversation about whether the Guardians are still truly the best, with Bulletproof pointing out that each member of the team is messed up mentally, emotionally, or physically. Samson has to acknowledge that their quality as a team has slipped, but insists that the Guardians are a family, with the same issues a family has. Samson assures Bulletproof that one day he'll know the difference. The Immortal resigns as team leader, confessing to Cecil that he's too emotionally broken over his lover Duplicate's death to be in the field. Cecil tries to refute, but Immortal leaves, heading home. Rudy is promoted back to team leader by Cecil. Mark's best friend William and his boyfriend Rick wake up in bed as Rick is having another nightmare about being his torturous transformation into a cyborg at the hands of D.A. Sinclair in Season 1. Rick expresses how no one understands what truly happened to him or what's been taken. Meanwhile, Cecil lets his assistant Donald finally see all the footage of his many, many deaths, making Donald realize how many times he's been brought back, how long he's been something other than human, and how many times he willingly sacrificed himself for the greater good. Mark goes with Amber to see the dean about his college career, which is in the balance. Mark finds out that his high school principal Winslow is now the college dean. Dean Winslow demands that Mark make a choice about the life he wants, the college life with Amber, or whatever he's been doing instead of his studies. Mark knows the real weight of that choice and the consequences. Donald returns to Cecil and confirms that he, Donald, was the one who authorized his memory erasure, to keep him effective on the job and unburdened by the massive weight of so many traumas. Cecil says the choice has always been Donald's, and this time Donald chooses to know everything. Debbie Grayson, Sandra Oh, gets asked out by her real estate partner Paul and accepts. Debbie gets home and finds her new nanny April is successfully caring for Nolan's new half-Thraxan son, Oliver. Mark gets home and all seems whole again in the Grayson household, until Debbie sees how much is weighing on Mark. Mark and Debbie have an adult talk about whether he and Amber can have a life together. Debbie confesses the double-edged sword of what it was like dating Nolan, the excitement of being with a superhero, but also the toll of how often she was alone. Mark asks if she would do it again, and Debbie wholeheartedly says she would because of the new lives Mark and Oliver, those choices produced. Mark asks if it would be the same if she didn't have kids, and Debbie's doubt is all too apparent. Meanwhile, at Upstate University, Rick is thinking about jumping off a building, and Donald answers William's call to help talk him down. Donald reveals to Rick that he too was rebuilt by the Global Defense Agency, and that his 39 deaths and returns were fueled by the belief that they could keep making the world a better place. It's that noble nature of his soul that never gets lost, and Rick sees hold of his existence the same way. Rick comes down off the ledge, and Donald is just as affirmed by his own words as Rick is. Mark ditches all of his costumes and comms and takes Amber out on a truly epic, superhero-sized date. The two have a great time until they sit down for dinner, trying to discuss plans for the next year of college. Those mundane plans are suddenly interrupted by Anissa, a female Viltrumite warrior who shows up out of nowhere and gets her hand around Amber's neck, demanding Mark talk with her or lose his woman and watch everyone in the restaurant die. Mark bargains for a meeting elsewhere, and Anissa agrees. Mark has to leave the clearly traumatized Amber and suit up, calling Cecil for backup. Invincible meets Anissa in the skies above the city ready for a fight, with the GDA on standby. Anissa doesn't want to fight. She truly wants to talk, appealing to Mark that projections prove that humanity has slim chance to survive the next centuries, while Viltrum will teach them order and prosperity. She questions what saving humanity means in those terms. Cecil and the GDA calculate that Mark has about the same odds of surviving against Anissa. Cecil calls Sinclair in his mad lab to see if a reanimation project is ready, but Sinclair is unsure. The situation takes another turn when a kaiju monster appears at sea, causing Mark and the GDA to change focus. Anissa concedes to the mission, wishing to see the son of Nolan in action. Mark tries to fight the giant sea dragon, but finds the cruise ship it's attacking to be in serious peril. After a few moments of watching Invincible struggle, Anissa one-shots the monster by flying through its skull so fast that she flings off all the blood and guts with her sudden stop, looking clean. After getting the ship to land safely, Anissa points out that her actions in saving human life represent what Viltrum will do for Earth, and Mark should embrace that notion like Nolan did. Mark still refuses and starts a fight with Anissa, despite Cecil's warning. Mark, unsurprisingly, gets thrashed by the superior warrior, and the GDA quickly realizes that Anissa's power and speed may outrank Nolan's, and they have no options. Cecil instructs Mark to concede and say he'll lead the Viltrumite takeover, stalling for time, but Mark still refuses. Anissa beats Mark nearly to death, literally crushing him under her heel. However, Mark calls her bluff, stating that Anissa needs him and can't kill him. Anissa makes Mark pass out, but when he wakes up, she confesses that it's not her job to kill him, but that there will be a Viltrumite who will do that job. Anissa leaves Earth, but Cecil and Mark have to both admit that they need to make renewed efforts to repel the Viltrumite warriors. Mark returns to Amber, and they can't deny the inevitable any longer. They are living in two separate worlds. They both tearfully, painfully admit that it's time to break up. Mark confesses that the scariest thing for him wasn't Amber nearly dying at Anissa's hands. It was the thought of who he would become if someone he loved was hurt or killed. Mark goes off to think by himself, only to get a call from Debbie. But it's not Debbie. Angstrom Levy is holding Debbie and Oliver hostage and calls Mark home for their long-awaited fight. Anissa returns to General Craig Clancy Brown aboard his ship to report on Mark's refusal of duty and heritage in preparing Earth for conquer. Craig deems her a failure, but the matter is put aside when the ship encounters Alan the alien, Seth Rogen, in space. Anissa fights Alan, who reveals that he's now able to withstand even her level of power since his resurrection. Anissa catches Alan with a drop kick, and the alien fiend's being knocked out so that the Viltrumites take him aboard their ship as a hostage. Invincible Season 2 Episode 8 began with a cliffhanger stopped. We are taken to a scene where we the viewer see an individual destroying the bot who was meant to be the guard for the cell. However, to our shocking surprise, the individual was Omni-Man. He seems to have escaped from his jail and even been okay, as we see him walking, rather than been crippled. However, as they all shoot him, he dodges all the bullets, seems not to affect him, only for the security guard to blast him with a heavy weapon. They all approach him thinking he's unconscious, just for Omni-Man to stand up, giving the one of the guard a soccer punch, and then kill them all. However, as Omni-Man was about finishing one of the last guard, just then, Craig comes in telling Omni-Man enough. They began talking, saying Omni-Man is now fit for his execution. We then see a guy called Taylor running and motivating himself to push harder. Immediately, we see Invincible reaching his home with full speed just to meet Armstrong Levy holding his mom's neck, preparing to snap it as he warns Mark. He, Armstrong Levy, disconnected all connections from Mark. Debbie told Mark about everything and he warned her. Armstrong is very furious, and as to Mark not recognizing him and even knowing what he did to him, making him this disfigured. He then pushed Debbie and Mark brother on the floor. He complained about he visiting different doctors in multiple dimensions and they couldn't still fix him. Mark attacked Armstrong just for him to take Mark to another dimension through a portal. Mark is shocked by this. We then see some creatures hovering around Mark trying to attack and eat him. Armstrong then brought Mark back. He talked about Mark's brother been rare and unique, saying he hasn't seen something like that just for him to throw it away. Mark rushes to save him, hurting herself in the process. Their scene then switches where we see Invincible Spider-Man fighting a villain. After a long extended fight scene, the villain holds the spider. Just as he's about finishing him off, Invincible appears from a portal, killing the villain. The Spider-Man thanks Mark for his help. They both discussed about Mark being from another dimension as he saw the portal Mark came from. Just as they both discussed, the villain knows Mechanic Worms grabs Mark's arm from his neck. Back to Levy, Debbie and her stepson are still in Levy custody, to which she tells her little boy everything would be alright, but Levy believes she just lied to her son. Meanwhile, Levy again brings back Mark home, but this time he threatened to put Debbie and Mark's brother to another dimension as he already opened a portal. Mark is very furious, but he calms down to talk to Levy. He went on apologizing for what he did, telling Levy that he isn't a killer as he tried saving him that night from the Mula twins. Levy became furious as he heard he saved Mark from that night. He then went on to send Mark to another dimension. While he did so, he tried remembering what happened that night, even remembering how he was little and how Mark from other dimension destroyed his life and even killed his little son. Levy cried and kept on remembering all the awful things he did. Just as he brings back Mark just to finish him, Mark then hit him, taking him out. Mark tells him it's all over as Levy still threatened to hurt his family. Just then, he then threw a knife at Debbie, to which Mark then runs to get it. He then entered a portal going to another dimension. But this dimension was Zombies multiverse. Levy commended Mark for his efforts. Just then, Debbie attacked Levy, hitting him from the back of his head. She picked up a broken glass, stabbing Armstrong. While she ran, she came across Mark as a portal opened. Mark began trying to dodge those Levy portals just for him to get into one again. Levy informed Debbie, saying she herself isn't innocent in all this as she was the one who encouraged her family in all of this into doing evil. But Debbie then told Levy that she raised Mark, which in return making Mark save the planet from a Viltrumite. He then went on to attack Debbie, breaking her hands. He then went on to carry Oliver, Mark's brother, determined to kill him and everyone Mark loves. In the next scene, we see Mark talking with some guys. We see Mark moving through portal, and we even get to see Batman. He just kept on moving to multiple dimension. Just then, Levy checked to see if Mark was okay, only for Mark to hold him and beg Levy to stop. Just then, he, Invincible, then saw what Levy did to his family. Mark went ballistic, taking Levy to the sky, driving him to the ground. He then began beating Mark, taking him through multiple multiverse. As he did so, Mark began beating him nearly to death, killing Levy. Mark cried. At home, the rescue team get to Mark's house and Cecil came in to help her. He rushes her to get hospitalized. Mark began to feel guilty for what he did to Levy, saying he had no other choice. He began reflecting, saying he lost control as Levy told him that he's now built differently and now strong. He immediately realized that he's stuck at this dimension with no way to get back home. In the space, Craig is seen beating Omni-Man as he stood up to walk. Just then, he walked toward Alan, and they communicated with Alan, informing Omni-Man he's here to rescue him. Back to the dimension where Mark is. He tries finding a way to get back home. Just then, we see the Eve and the other soups coming to meet Mark from a portal, but they seems to be different Eve as they inform Mark that all this event happened 20 years ago. And they open a portal back to take Mark home. Eve is sad as to let Mark go, and she told Mark that she loved him and informed Mark to tell Eve that he loved her or something to make her not get her hopes up. She then let him go. Mark went straight to the medic to ask about his mother from Cecil. He then went to meet his mother, informing her she killed him. Cecil meet Mark as he tells Mark he isn't his dad and Mark didn't have any choice. Mark tells Cecil that he lost his mind. Cecil begged Mark to go home to have some rest. Robot and his girl talks about how he cares for her and apologizes for how he's been acting lately to fix her. And she tells him that she prefer him talking to her rather than talking to her like she's a robot. The scene switches a man waking into his home after fishing. Turns out he's immortal, as he's surprised to see Duplicate alive. She talked about her wanting to walk away, but she couldn't do so because of immortal. To which he said it's all okay. Some group of girls walking into a building just for them to see a dead man on the floor. Immediately a man appeared ready to attack, but he became surprised they are female just for Mark to appear and to save them. A montage of Mark and his father plays through his mind as he went through different universe. Mark and his mother went back home just to find their home destroyed. Debbie feels depressed and sad. She went into Mark's room and couldn't see Mark. She found Mark on the roof and they both talked. Mark also informed her he's quitting college. His mom advised him about the advantages of schooling, but then Mark cries. We see Eve and she flew immediately to meet Mark. As she asked Mark about how he's doing and feeling, they both hold hands, and again, Mark didn't bring up the topic of their relationship. At the spaceship, Alan the alien talked to Omni-Man about what Nolan did, and they both talk about Mark, to which Nolan said he's ready to accept his fate. He went on saying how guilty he feels about that. Just then, Omni-Man then said he misses his wife, Debbie. Then the show then came to an end. If you love content like this, please kindly subscribe for more.